Thank you so much, everyone, for coming here tonight. I'm Margaret Brennan. As Noel just said, I'm with Bloomberg News. I'm actually the host of a program called In Business with Margaret Brennan on Bloomberg Television. But beyond that, for the past about 5 years, I've also been a John Whitehead Fellow here at the Foreign Policy Association. And as some of you may know, I know Mr. Whitehead is right here this evening, and I want to say thank you so much for making that possible. As some of you may know, Mr. Whitehead has endowed a program here at the FPA that allows young professionals to become involved and sit in on some of the great conversations that are held and hosted by the FPA, along with events like this tonight. So thank you. I'm delighted to preside here at the Financial Services Dinner in this association's 92nd year. I have attended many of these from your positions, and I've got to say, this year's lineup is absolutely stellar. We've got a number of wonderful leaders, so I do want to thank Noel Lateef, the president of the FPA, along with Chairwoman Mary Belknap for putting this together and for all of your hard work all year long. We do have a wonderful turnout tonight. And because of what a great lineup it is, I'm about to tell you the best thing you're going to hear all night, which is that I'm going to be brief and be seated. Archibald Cox, chairman of Barclays, Roger Ferguson, the president and chief executive officer of TIAA-CREF, Stephen Green, the chairman of HSBC Holdings, and David Rubenstein, the founding partner and managing director at private equity giant, the Carlyle Group, all going to be speaking here tonight. So we're going to be hearing from them. But first, to begin the festivities, I would like to introduce Diana Taylor. She's a managing director at Wolfenson & Company and a distinguished fellow of the Foreign Policy Association. She's served as New York State Superintendent of Banks and a chairwoman of the New York State Banking Board. As superintendent, a position to which she was appointed by Governor George Pataki, she was regulator for more than 3,500 financial institutions with assets over $1.5 trillion. So a woman to be listened to. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome to the podium Diana Taylor.
Thank you so much. The bad news is that $1.5 trillion is probably significantly less now than it used to be, but I left, so. Anyway, I am absolutely delighted to be with you this evening, and I thank the Foreign Policy Association and all for the important work that you do to educate the American public on world affairs. That mission is all the more critical in the wake of the recent financial crisis. A crisis that made clear the need for better informed and equipped market participants at all levels. The crisis also made clear the need for a modernized regulatory infrastructure that can balance the need to reduce, or at least mitigate, systemic risk, and at the same time facilitate the national and international capital flows so necessary for a global recovery and the economic growth we would all like to see. We know that the financial markets are necessary to create growth, stimulate economic activity, and bring the world together culturally and politically. Prior to the crisis, the public not only agreed, but had faith that the financial services industry and its participants would utilize that dynamic and their money to deliver prosperity. There's no question that that faith has been shaken. A recent Gallup poll shows that barely 1/3 of Americans polled expressed confidence in the banking system. The challenge for those of us in this room and throughout the financial services industry and government is to restore that confidence, not only among consumers of financial services, but also among the institutions themselves which provide those services. This will require everyone to pull together to fix the problems, which will be doubly hard because there is not agreement at all about what those problems even are, let alone what the solution should be. I was reading through the Banana Skins report for 2010. The results are really not all that surprising. The number one risk, which has not even appeared on the list prior to this year, is political risk, followed by credit risk in the number 2 position, and too much regulation as number 3. This presents a serious problem, and we will not be able to solve that problem until we figure out how to restore trust in the system and the confidence needed to make it work. Risk number 1, political risk, and risk number 3, regulatory risk, will not go away until financial institutions figure that out and do something about it. And we need to work with our government to make that happen. We cannot avoid the challenges that we face. Speaking to the Foreign Policy Association on the eve of his 4th term in office, President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, and I quote, "The power which this nation has attained, the political, the economic, the military, and above all, the moral power, has brought to us the responsibility and with it the opportunity for leadership in the community of nations. It is our best interest, and in the name of peace and humanity, this nation cannot, must not, and will not shirk that responsibility." A lot's changed in the world since President Roosevelt made those remarks. We are not quite so obviously the predominant power anymore. However, we must show the world we are committed to implementing smart regulations and to having even smarter market participants. The financial services community has a critical role to play in both of those areas, and I believe that we are up to that challenge. To be sure, the regulatory system that emerges from this crisis must soothe and improve markets, but it must also be accompanied by a robust campaign to provide consumers and investors with the tools that they need to navigate the 21st century financial system. As a former regulator, it is my experience that providing these tools benefits the entire market, not just those who utilize them. The financial services sector has to make money. That is obviously what it's all about, but that must occur in a way that does not cause more harm than good to the market participants, the institutions themselves, and those most affected by them, especially their customers. That's why I am so pleased that the Foreign Policy Association is giving awards tonight for corporate social responsibility to 4 outstanding men who run 4 outstanding financial institutions: Archibald Cox, Roger Ferguson, Stephen Green, David Rubenstein. So thank you and congratulations. And I personally want to thank you for what you do and the results that you have attained. If we're going to come out of the other side of this financial crisis stronger and better, we need to continue leading by example to show people they can again trust the system and have the confidence that it will work for them. So I want to again thank the Foreign Policy Association and Noel Lateef for convening such an impressive quorum of bankers and committed citizens to the cause of corporate responsibility and public education in world affairs. I also want to thank you for listening so carefully and for the opportunity to be with you this evening and to share my belief that together we are up to this task ahead of us. So thank you.
Thank you so much to Diana Taylor. Now, there are about 400 of you or so in this room here tonight, and I do want to tell you we're going to have 2 of the speakers pre-dinner to post. So if you could be gentle with your china in between that'd be wonderful for the speakers as they come up to accept their awards. And so often these days, people in the media, just like me, are too often speaking about the lack of responsibility, the lack of restraint exhibited by parts of the financial community in the run-up to the crisis that we're all trying to pull ourselves out of. That's why it's important, and it's certainly fitting here tonight to celebrate those corporate leaders who are engaging the communities in which they work in a socially responsible manner. Now, the Foreign Policy Association gives these awards tonight, these corporate social responsibility awards, with the hope that these leaders will serve as role models for other organizations. So with that in mind, I'd like to begin the awards by asking David Coulter to come to the stage. Now, David is a managing director and senior advisor at law firm of Warburg Pincus. He's also a member of the board of directors right here at the Foreign Policy Association. So I'm going to ask David to come to the podium, and he is going to set us up for our very first honoree of the evening, and that is Roger. Before we get to Roger Ferguson, David's going to set us up for our first honoree tonight. You ready?
Good evening, everyone. It is my great and easy pleasure tonight to introduce the first honoree for FPA's Corporate Social Responsibility Award. I say easy because of the 400 people in this room, I'd bet a vast majority are very familiar with the long and very distinguished career of Archibald Cox. And I know that he's held in deep respect by a number of you. So I'm going to set the stage for timing this evening. So without further ado, I will introduce Archie.
Thank you, David. I'm honored to accept this prestigious award not for myself, but on behalf of Barclays and all its employees worldwide. At this time, with serious public debate and not a little stone throwing going on across the globe about banks and their social use, I believe it is of particular significance that this award should be given to a global financial institution like Barclays. I sincerely hope that this award will be taken as what it is, an expression that banks, not just Barclays, have a very important social role to play, and that we take this role very seriously. Now let me say a few words about global social responsibility and what that means for Barclays. Barclays was formed over 300 years ago. We are a global firm, highly client-focused, with operations in over 50 countries, and with approximately 50 million clients. Clients ranging from individuals in rural Africa to the world's largest corporations. About 150,000 employees ensure that these clients get the best possible service every day. There's no doubt that a firm of this size has significant social responsibilities to all its stakeholders, be that clients, employees, shareholders, or the wider societies in which we operate. We take this responsibility very seriously. In part, here's how. Financial institutions, banks, are the backbone of any economy. The more sophisticated they are, the more the economies in which they operate are developed, resulting in higher GDP per capita, i.e. more wealth and stability. And higher wealth and greater stability in turn enhance the ability of banks to provide attractive and sophisticated products. A virtuous cycle. A good example to illustrate this point is lending. There is a very clear positive link between lending and GDP growth. Indeed, in the United States, as best we can presently determine, every $3 in lending leads to GDP growth of $1. In the developing world, lending may well lead to even more GDP growth. Increasing GDP gives rise to increased wealth and lifts people out of poverty, which in turn helps to create more stable societies with clearer and more solid legal, regulatory, and political frameworks. This in turn enables banks to lend more due to improved risk assessment and clear and enforceable ownership. This is just one example of the inherent social use of banks. There are many more across all the different businesses in which Barclays operates, be that oil hedging to enable countries such as Mexico to protect their budgets, trade financing for small UK corporations, or providing access to financial products to Africa's rural population. So social responsibility means first and foremost to ensure that we do a great job being a bank, which I believe we do. But doing a great job as a bank isn't enough. Social responsibility doesn't stop there, and we have a number of initiatives that address different aspects of social responsibility in a more targeted fashion. A few of these are as follows. During the recession of the last 2 years, we've gone the extra mile for our customers. For instance, we did financial health checks for 250,000 customers in the UK. We worked with customers to avoid residential mortgage foreclosures, with the result that Barclays is only involved in about 1% of UK foreclosures, despite holding about 7% of UK mortgages. We maintained lending levels to ensure continued access to credit. We lent £35 billion in the UK since April of 2009, divided roughly 50-50 between businesses and individuals. We do inclusive banking. ABSA, our majority-owned subsidiary in South Africa, which has 10 million customers, is now the market leader for low-income customers in that country, those earning less than 3,000 Rand, or about $300 a month, with a market share of 33%. 2 years ago, we initiated a program entitled Banking on Change, a community finance, microfinance partnership between Barclays, Clinton Global Initiative, CARE International, and Plan International to improve access to financial services to about 500,000 poor people currently outside the financial system in 10 developing countries in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. We've committed $20 million over 3 years to this initiative. This program builds on our experience in the community investment financial inclusion space, including groundbreaking projects in Ghana and Uganda. It forms part of our Banking on Brighter Futures program, a 5-year, $150 million community investment program supporting 1,500 projects around the world. We also take our environmental responsibilities seriously. Barclays is currently the largest trader in the global carbon market and was the first to set up a dedicated carbon trading desk. To date, we've traded more than 2 billion tons of carbon credits, with a total notional value around $30 billion. We believe this is an important initiative to aid in cleaning up the environment. As a firm, we've made our UK and European operations carbon neutral by offsetting emissions from energy use and travel. We take pride also in being #1 in the global banking sector for our environmental reporting according to the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. We also fully support diversity in the workplace and try hard to ensure that our employment profile reflects that of the environment in which we operate. And last but not least, I want to mention a few dedicated programs. Barclays supports charities in places where we do business. 3 examples. In Beijing, we've donated over £130,000 to Compassion for Migrant Children, an organization that provides education, jobs, and life skill training to migrant children. In the U.S., we help support a charity called First Book, which works to improve access to books in underprivileged areas. In the aftermath of the terrible tragedy in Haiti, we donated a total of £500,000 to support relief efforts, and independently, our employees have broadly supported these efforts. Building Young Futures is our partnership with UNICEF. It helps disadvantaged young people by providing access to education, vocational training, and job opportunities. Barclays is investing $150 million over the next 5 years to support this initiative, and we're proud to say that over 37,000 children and young people have benefited from this program to date. Before closing, I would be remiss if I did not mention the very significant efforts made by our employees, of whom we are very proud. More than 43,000 of our colleagues in 29 countries are involved annually in our fundraising and volunteering initiatives supporting community projects around the world. I hope I've been able to demonstrate that Barclays is highly aware of its social responsibility and takes it very seriously indeed, not just in the United Kingdom and the United States, but everywhere we operate. With that, on behalf of Barclays, thank you again for this prestigious award. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next honoree this evening actually brought his lawyer. How many other people brought their legal counsel here tonight? Roger Ferguson, the CEO of Retirement Plan Manager, TIAA Craft, brought his legal counsel with him tonight, who is going to be making the introduction. I'm joking here. He is a general counsel, but I'm just teasing him about that. Jonathan Fagelson is a general counsel and the senior vice president of TIAA Craft. can I ask you to come up to the podium to present the award? Jonathan, you came up on my right here.
Well, I'd like to say that Roger never goes anywhere without his lawyer, but that wouldn't really be the truth. I am very honored to present the Corporate Social Responsibility Award to Roger Ferguson, who, as you know, is the President and Chief Executive Officer of TIA-CREF. And I should note, by the way, that I'm presenting this award in my capacity as a Foreign Policy Association board member and not as Roger's lawyer and employee. So I'm not trying to curry favor with Roger, but if it works, I'll take it. As I think you all know, TIA-CREF is widely known for its commitment to and leadership in corporate social responsibility. And Roger's background, both in the public and private sector, make him the ideal CEO for a company that leads by example in this area. So let me just give you a quick snapshot of Roger's background. He trained as an economist and a lawyer at Harvard, and from there went to the law firm of Davis, Polk & Wardwell, where he was an associate for a period of time. He later he left Davis Polk and joined McKinsey, where he rose to become a partner, providing guidance to leading financial services firms and running McKinsey's research and information systems. Roger subsequently, in 1997, became a governor of the Federal Reserve Board, and as vice chairman in 2001, Roger oversaw the Fed's actions immediately following the September 11th attacks. And his steady leadership and calm communications during this difficult period were widely praised for maintaining confidence in the financial services sector. Roger joined TIA-CREF as CEO in April of 2008, and as he's noted on several occasions publicly, there was probably no better time to take the reins at one of America's leading retirement providers than at the beginning of the worst market downturn in 70 years. Since becoming CEO, Roger has spoken extensively about the need for a holistic retirement system that provides lifetime financial security for all Americans. His experience, which is vast at the highest levels of both public and private sectors, makes Roger uniquely suited to understand the policy and market factors shaping retirement and how to influence them. In addition to these professional achievements, Roger also serves on numerous boards and committees, including President Obama's Economic Recovery Advisory Board. And last but not least, I can vouch for the fact that Roger is also a very, very nice guy, which is very helpful to me in my job. So I'm proud to work for Roger. I really am. He's a wonderful leader and a great man, and to introduce him to you tonight. So without further ado, Roger.
Do the award first, okay.
Let's do that.
All right.
That's the important part.
That's the important part. John, thank you very much. Good. We're supposed to shake hands. There you go. Thank you. Great. Thank you. John, thank you very, very much for those kind remarks, and I'm sure they were all heartfelt since I wrote them myself. That is not true. One of the things that John did not say is that while I'm working with the President's Economic Recovery Advisory Board, I had to find an internal colleague whose judgment I would trust to help me do that work, and I turned to John Fagelson. So, John, I really do appreciate not just the kind introduction, but the support that you've given me in the couple of years that I've been at TIA-CREF. And I don't doubt that John's perspective, which is global and indeed well-balanced, is shaped, at least in part, maybe in large part, by his involvement here with the Foreign Policy Association. In fact, several TIA-CREF leaders are members here. John Biggs, one of my predecessors as chairman, president, and CEO of TIA-CREF, has been active for many, many years in the Foreign Policy Association. And Keith Stock, who was a partner of mine at McKinsey, is now the Chief Strategy Officer at TIA-CREF, was on the dinner committee, is also actively involved with the FPA. And so you can see that the link between TI-CREF and the Foreign Policy Association is very deep at this point. Another thing that you may not know, though, is that the link between our two companies, TIAA-CREF and the Foreign Policy Association, goes back many years. Both of these fine institutions were founded in 1918, and in the 1950s, when CREF came into existence, the Foreign Policy Association was one of our first clients. And so I must say to Noel Latif, who is here, that you've trusted us for nearly 60 years, and I can assure you that we will continue to do all we can to earn your trust and confidence. Now, John was kind enough to present physically the award to me, but obviously this award is presented to the 7,000 employees of TI-CREF, and on behalf of all of them, I want to thank you for giving us this award. I also want to take a moment to recognize my friends and acquaintances who are the other recipients. I think their institutions are also very, very deserving. Let me take just a minute to describe what we've done at TI-CREF with respect to these activities. You may know that TI-CREF describes itself as being a financial services company for the greater good. And tonight, I'd like to tell you about two of the things that we're doing in that regard. First, I'm going to talk about our commitment to socially responsibly investing. And then secondly, talking about our efforts that John has indicated on the, to address the inadequacies of the American retirement system, which is clearly leaving far too many people short of where they need to be to enjoy lifelong financial security. So first, to socially responsible investing at TI-CREF. Our approach is based on the knowledge that many of our clients want their investments to yield both positive financial returns and a positive social gain. Socially responsible investing at TI-CREF relies on a three-pronged strategy. First, social screening. Secondly, shareholder advocacy. And then third, and most importantly, impact investing. Our socially screened funds consider companies' environmental, social, and governance records, including actions on human rights, ethics, and labor and product standards throughout the supply chain. Now, we're not new to this area at all. Our CREF Social Choice Variable Annuity Account was launched in 1990 and is now the largest comprehensively screened investment vehicle for individual investors in the United States. In 2008, we diversified the Social Choice account to include international exposure, and today, international investments represent about 13% of the $8.67 billion portfolio that we have in the Social Choice account. Now, this internationalization allows our investors, the TI-CREF participants, to position themselves for growth in international markets while also ensuring that their values are reflected not just domestically, but also in the global arena. The second part of responsible investing strategy is shareholder advocacy, which has particular resonance now in the wake of the accounting scandals and the financial crisis that the two previous speakers referred to. We recently issued a paper outlining our perspective on corporate governance. I'll do a brief ad. This is the paper. It's available outside. Now, the essence of this paper is that large institutional investors have a special social responsibility to be actively involved in board issues and to hold management accountable for performance, not just in the short term, not quarter to quarter, but over the long term. Executive teams certainly should be allowed to manage their companies, and in fact, we've abstained from voting on measures that we thought were too prescriptive. But, importantly, on the other hand, investors must be involved in making sure that boards and managers set the right priorities and adhere to those priorities. Our corporate governance team is active both domestically and internationally. For example, we recently had to make a very difficult decision with regard to companies in our portfolio that have business relationships with the government of the Sudan. For 3 years, our trustees, our executives, and our corporate governance team worked to encourage these companies to recognize the genocide in the Sudan and to take action to ameliorate it. Last year, we announced that we were going to intensify discussions with a handful of companies. One of those companies, Petronas, which is the Malaysian oil company, was receptive and continues to work with us to find solutions. Unfortunately, 4 other companies were unreceptive. So at the beginning of this year, we announced our decision to sell our holdings in those companies. We did not arrive at this decision lightly. Divestiture is a very rare action to take. But when companies do not feel the same urgency to address a problem that we do, and other avenues prove fruitless, then at that point we have to make a decision that reflects the long-term financial interests and the values of our investors. The third pillar of our socially responsible investing strategy is impact investing, an important component of which is microfinance. Our global microfinance investment program met its target of investing $100 million in international microfinance projects 18 months ahead of schedule. And now we're looking for ways to expand on that commitment. We believe microfinance remains one of the more effective tools to promote economic development in many parts of the world. In each of these areas, investment screening, shareholder advocacy, and impact investing, we are uniting our clients' desire for financial returns with their values, and it is one of the ways that we keep our trust with the public. Another way that we believe we keep that trust is by taking the lead in efforts to improve Americans' retirement security. With help, millions of our American citizens get to and through retirement by offering products that not only help them with the potential for wealth accumulation, but importantly guarantee a stream of income that can support them until the end of their lives. Yet, for many Americans, particularly now, we must admit the future is uncertain. According to research from McKinsey, the average American family will face a savings gap of $250,000 at retirement. And Social Security, which is the bedrock, is clearly enduring increasing stress. You may have seen a recent newspaper report that the system barely turned in a surplus last year as a result of the dire economic conditions of the day. In 2016, the trustees expect Social Security to begin paying out more than it takes in. 2016 is not too far away. It is clear that our patchwork system for retirement is not stable, and consequently, our fellow citizens are not secure. As John mentioned in his introduction, I have been speaking regularly around a need for a holistic retirement system, one that has 5 components. First, we must have universal participation and adequate funding. Starting early and saving 11 to 14% of income, which is about double today's average contribution rate, should yield for most people enough savings to replace 70% of income in retirement. Secondly, offering people a range of investment options, but without overwhelming them. So 15 to 20 options seems to be a good number. Third, making available objective and non-commissioned advice so that individuals can get informed guidance and feel confident that their advisor has their interests at heart. Fourth, offering vehicles to save for healthcare expenses in retirement, which studies show could total between $200,000 and $800,000 for couples over 65 who do not have an employer-sponsored health plan. And fifth, guaranteed income for life. Lifetime income, unfortunately, is often overlooked in today's retirement planning. But individuals see how much money they have in their accounts, but do they know how much income security that money will afford them? Will it support them throughout a retirement that can last 20, 30, or more years? I personally was heartened to hear President Obama address the need for retirement security prior to the State of the Union. I think the President was absolutely right when he said Americans deserve retirement security, quote, whether or not you're rich. TICREF will continue to press the case for building a holistic retirement system that provide security for all Americans. So let me close by saying how seriously we at TIAA-CREF take our responsibility to be good corporate citizens. Tonight, I've discussed two ways we're meeting that responsibility through both our long-term commitment to socially responsible investing on the one hand, and a leadership role in helping more Americans get safely to and through retirement. We receive support in these endeavors from TIAA-CREF participants, men and women in the academic, medical, research, and cultural fields who have a deep sense of what it means to serve, as we do, the greater good. With their support, we will continue to set right the priorities and strive to make the right decisions. So once again, on behalf of all of my colleagues at TIAA-CREF, 7,000 of them, plus members of TIAA-CREF family currently and in the past who are here in the audience, let me thank you for this kind award, and let me thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
But first I'd like to ask Chris Flowers, the chairman of J.C. Flowers, to come here to the podium to deliver our award here, and that is, again, the Corporate Social Responsibility Award.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And my thanks to the Foreign Policy Association for convening this enjoyable evening. It's my privilege to present to Stephen the Foreign Policy Association's Corporate Social Responsibility Award. Stephen, as I'm sure you all know, is the group chairman of HSBC Holdings. HSBC has a market cap today of nearly $200 billion, making it the third biggest financial institution in the world and the largest outside of China. HSBC arguably has the best franchise of any bank in the world, and founded in 1865, has come through this extraordinary cyclone as a tower of strength. I've known Stephen for many years. Stephen was educated at Oxford and MIT, is an ordained Anglican priest, and that's, for those of you who don't follow church politics, that's the same as Episcopalian here in the United States. We ditched the Anglican Church in 1789 and renamed it Episcopalian for reasons that I won't get into because we were mad at Britain at the time. He joined HSBC in 1982 and has held positions of increasing responsibility, including group CEO, and then in 2006, group chairman. Stephen has presided over a management team which has handled the devastation in financial services with skill and grace, and put HSBC in arguably a stronger position than ever before. Stephen, thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to your remarks.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a huge honour for me to stand before you and on behalf of HSBC to accept this Corporate Citizenship Award from the Foreign Policy Association. It's an award that I accept, as previous acceptors have said, on behalf of, in my case, 300,000 colleagues around the world. What a terrific team they are, and a number of them who are here tonight. It is just 18 months since the collapse of Lehman Brothers. An awful lot of water has flown under the bridge since. But it's because of the globalized nature of our modern world that the contagion that started with a subprime mortgage crisis here in this country could spread so far, so wide, so quickly, well beyond American shores. Among the victims in the path of destruction was the Icelandic banking system, a number of major European institutions, and a great deal of public trust in the global financial system. And as that happened, it tipped us again with unprecedented speed into what has rightly been called the first synchronized global recession. Among the many lessons that we take from the crisis, and there are many lessons, I want to dwell on just one this evening. It's a lesson about the rebalancing of the world, or as Margaret put it, the shift of the centre of gravity. Because the crisis has thrown into sharp relief the growing divergence between the long-term growth prospects of the East and the West, Today, as is commonplace, we're seeing a two-speed global recovery playing itself out. The developed world is likely to grow by under 2% this year, whilst China and many other emerging markets can expect percentage point growth significantly greater than that. In the case of China, we believe nearly 10% this year, and India probably a similarly striking performance. All of the indicators are that this shift in economic power isn't just some recession-driven blip. And indeed, I would say that the financial crisis, so far from having derailed a trend that has been in place for perhaps 20 years now, that shift of central gravity from west to east, has, if anything, accelerated it. Nor is this simply a question of economics. The transference of economic power is increasingly driving a rebalancing of the centre of gravity of politics and of culture too. Even now, I question whether we have really begun to fully understand the vast scale of this change and what it amounts to, not only for our economy, but for the whole of society and our self-understanding. How we define and build on the common ground that all human beings do have in response to the imperatives of globalization and urbanization is arguably the biggest challenge for all of us in this century. Here in the West, we've become accustomed to the comfort of a unipolar world. Yet the convention of a unipolar world is really only about 150 years old. And it is worth reminding ourselves that even by the 1400s, China had a nascent market economy, earlier and on a much larger scale than Europe's at the time. By 1820, China accounted for something like 1/3 of world GDP, whilst the US was still, relatively speaking, a dot on the map, with less than 2% of world GDP. At about that time, Britain, of course, was emerging as the world's first modern superpower because of the Industrial Revolution, which gained momentum there before elsewhere. And then, as we all know, British dominance came to an end. I would suggest that the year 1871, with the unification of Germany, is the right date to end British global dominance. And in the wake of the Second World War, it was the US waiting in the wings to take over. But today, China is once again setting the pace for change. The economics we're all familiar with. GDP per head has more than doubled since the year 2000. Infant mortality has halved in 20 years. Literacy levels are now well above 90%, a higher level than in a number of developed countries. And according to the IMF, China accounted for over half of world growth in the past 3 years. 70% of Chinese people now agree that they are better off in a free market economy, get this, more than either in the US or the UK. The West is no longer the sole preserve of market-oriented capitalism. China's story, like that of India and other Asian countries, is part of a far larger narrative, that of a fundamental and unprecedented change in the global economy. Taken together, China and India now represent around 40% of the world's population, and alongside Brazil and Russia, they've become known as the eponymous BRICS. Yet it is a sign of the speed with which the global economy is changing that this shorthand, which was coined about 10 years ago by one of our Wall Street competitors, found in so many development strategies now, is already looking surprisingly out of date. In the decade ahead, we're likely increasingly to focus on opportunities in other emerging markets too. For example, there are to take the newest acronym, the CIVETS, CIVETS, Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Egypt, Turkey and South Africa. So called, but after the cats that are in fact found in, not all of them, but a number of those countries. They may not have the scale and influence of the BRICS, but they've all got diversified economies and they have proven plausibly robust during the financial crisis, and they look, arguably, reasonably stable politically. What is more, their economic growth will also help reinforce momentum within their respective regions. This will add further impetus to the flows of trade and ideas between emerging markets. so that the rebalancing is not just from west to east, but also from east to south. In contrast, some of Europe's suffering economies have now got a different acronym, a rather less flattering one. They've become known as the pigs. The economies of Portugal, Ireland, Greece and Spain have been singled out because of the potential impact of their post-recession deficits on the rest of the Eurozone. And of course, in the case of Greece, this is a very topical subject indeed. When our European pigs will fly again is perhaps difficult to predict, but what we can forecast with much more certainty is that the economies of the emerging and re-emerging countries of the world will drive global growth in the generation ahead. Indeed, Asia is expected to overtake the European Union and the US, becoming the largest contributor of global GDP by the year 2016. Of course, there are some who don't agree with this scenario for the next generation. There are those who think that we can turn the clock back to some, in inverted commas, golden age of a simpler, less connected world without all the challenges that this all poses for us all. There are those who think that the growth in some of those emerging markets, perhaps China in particular, is going to be derailed by asset bubbles and all that go with that. There are those who think that there's a real risk of protectionism, or perhaps even think that it's a desirable means of stopping this this huge momentum of change. But the fact is that you can't turn the clock back. The difference is now that, unlike the time of the rise of industrialised Europe in the 19th century and the rapid development of the US at the turn of the 20th century, national economies are much more interconnected. These connections come through trade, through global institutions, through diplomacy, through travel, and through ever-growing communication channels, the TV, the internet, mobile telephony. The pendulum will not swing back from this globalising world. We have no choice but to face up to the reality and the opportunity that globalisation brings, to forge fresh alliances, to work together if we are to deliver sustainable economic and social development. There are people who argue that Asia's growth, for example, is unsustainable. They point to the emergence of possible asset bubbles and the risk of inflation as so-called growth blockers. Indeed, only last month at Davos, I was asked by a senior journalist whether China's boom wasn't just because it was building bridges to nowhere just to keep people busy, Japanese style. Well, absolutely not. Far from building bridges to nowhere, China is making the kind of investment in its infrastructure that a huge and developing country needs. Unlike Japan, which in the 1990s was essentially a rich country trying to stimulate demand, China is a poor country equipping itself with railroads and energy infrastructure, highways, which are most definitely going somewhere. The government is also increasingly investing in healthcare and education and social welfare, something which will have the dual effect of creating a healthier, better educated population and at the same time stimulating domestic consumption. And all of this will gradually over time help to rebalance its economy and, I believe, ensure sustainable growth. Then there are those who worry about unemployment and the temptation to protectionism. And for sure this is a concern that should bother us all. I think it was one of our greatest successes that in response to the recession of the last couple of years, countries on the whole have not closed their borders and pulled up the drawbridge to trade. But we do know that the West faces a difficult road to recovery, and some viewpoints may be changing. As Larry Summers pointed out recently, today 1 in 5 American men aged between their mid-20s and their mid-50s are out of work. In the 1960s, 95% were in employment. But in the depths of our beings, we all know that the subtlest flirtations with protectionist rhetoric are dangerous. The truth is, and we all know this, that protectionist policies will do nothing to help Western recovery be sustainable. More importantly, short-term thinking can only cause lasting damage to the very commercial and cultural relationships on which our collective future surely now depends. So how can we work together to meet the challenges of a changing and increasingly multipolar world? Well, first, one of the stark lessons of the 20th century is surely that there is no acceptable alternative to a market-based approach to development. It is an approach which has already lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in countries such as China, such as India. Yet now the working age population of the developing world exceeds 3 billion, and it will increase by another billion over the coming generation. One of the great opportunities that we have as business leaders and individuals of the 21st century is to extend the benefits of economic development to many more people who have hitherto been marginalised. There are plenty of threats and challenges and difficulties in this. There are also surely significant opportunities. Secondly, by harnessing technology, we will be able to connect emerging markets to global trade networks, even when the physical infrastructures are relatively underdeveloped. This will transform not only the way we bank, but how we transact in a whole host of ways. Who needs fixed-line phones, for example, when mobile telephony in China is already in the hands of 500 million people, and India is soon to reach that number as well? We also need to think about what the dynamism and entrepreneurialism of emerging markets will mean for us in the West. Inventions born of necessity in those parts of the world are unlocking their mass market, they're challenging Western market dominance and Western thinking. For example, just to name but one, in India, Tata Motors have launched a car for just $2,000. The US and Europe can surely take note of some of the technical developments in those parts of the world. Third, and perhaps most important of all, we need, I would suggest, to recalibrate the whole Western mindset. There are several ways in which that's true. We can no longer think in zero-sum terms. Instead of winners and losers, we have to look at where the opportunities lie and work collaboratively across the world to achieve them. It is becoming clearer, particularly to those of us who live and work in financial centres like London and, of course, here in New York, that places like Hong Kong and Singapore are already global leaders too in the financial markets, and Shanghai will not be far behind. Helping emerging markets to develop their capital markets is just one way we can deepen our relationships and build a mutually beneficial and sustainable future. This is not a zero-sum game, even if it means that a place like London is going to lose market share over the coming years. During this time of great demographic and economic change, fresh thinking, international cooperation, and the sharing of expertise between industry, government, and society is going to be needed as never before. Indeed, it is the only means by which we can hope to deliver sustainable value, social and economic development, and increased prosperity across a broad front. This will take time, and it will not always be easy, of course. The far-reaching changes in international relationships and in society all over the world that are going to be precipitated by all of this are not just a phenomenon of commerce and economics. They also touch on ideas and culture and heritage. They reach into the human spirit in a far more profound way. They change our very self-definition. It is through this interplay of culture between different civilizations in different parts of the world that we can begin at least to build a greater mutual trust and understanding. Indeed, I believe that one of the most exciting manifestations of the world's growing interconnectedness is precisely the growth in cultural exchange between such great civilizations as the Western civilization, the Chinese civilization, the Indian civilization, and so on. I recently read a valedictory article by the Chinese ambassador in Britain. She was a very successful ambassador, very recently recalled to be a minister in the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And she wrote that having studied English literature at school in China, she spent many happy hours during her tenure of office in London visiting such places as Jane Austen's City of Bath and Wordsworth's Lake District. How many of the English know so much about Chinese history and culture and literature as she knew about English culture and literature? There is the challenge, there is the opportunity, there is the imperative that we all have to face up to in this very exciting 21st century. Thank you very much.
We're coming up on the last bit of the evening. I'm going to ask for a little bit of audience participation here. First off, HSBC and TIAA CREF. First person who can explain to me both acronyms in the next few minutes. Raise your hand. Over here, table 5. I'm serious. What was that? You got it? I owe you a well done. Very well done. Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, and this is a harder one, TIAA CREF. Teachers, I'm looking at my notes, and you got it, so I'm impressed. Teachers Insurance and Annuity Association College Retirement Equities Fund. Anyway, I was amused. Let's move on to our final guest of the evening, our final honoree. I'd like to actually ask Harold Bogle, who was here at the table. I see him working his way up here to the podium, who's going to make our introduction to our final honoree of the evening. I was very lucky as well, I should say, to have David Rubenstein of Carlyle Group, our final honoree, on my program earlier today. He's a very, very interesting guest and a wonderful honoree, so I want to, without further ado, hand it over to you, Mr. Bogle, to introduce him.
Thank you very much. Our last honoree reminded me that I and he stand between you and the remainder of the Olympics for this evening, so we should try to be prompt. And I recognize that Chris Flowers and David Coulter gave a very brief introduction. I might be a little bit longer. Your program indicates many of David's great accomplishments, so I won't cover them all. But as you know, he was chief counsel to the U.S. Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Constitutional Amendments in '76 and '77. He was a member of the Carter administration as deputy assistant to the president for domestic policy. He serves as regent, trustee, senior officer, or advisory member for a vast variety of our vital institutions: Duke, Johns Hopkins, University of Chicago, the Smithsonian, the Lincoln Center, the Kennedy Center, the Sloan Kettering Institute, the Institute for Advanced Studies, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the Economic Club of Washington, Woodrow Wilson School, Stanford Institute, Hoover Institute, and the Harvard Business School Board Dean of Advisors, among other things. But what's also remarkable and distinctive for David and his partners, his founding partners of Carlyle, is that they are an entrepreneurial group who established a firm in 1987 that's become one of the leaders in an industry. They have 900 professionals in the firm, operating in 22 countries with over 1,300 investors. They've logged thousands of miles, as David does, both raising money and doing transactions around the world. It's not only in the United States, but in Asia, Brazil and Latin America, the Mideast, and in Europe, as many of you know, and Carlyle's become a very significant sign of a vital industry that has grown over the last 30 years and is one of the foundations of that industry. To many people, we know of David as the flying face and the moving industrialist of the private equity world, but there are many other elements regarding both Carlyle and David that I think are germane, particularly as regard the issues of social responsibility that have become so prominent in both today's press and within our world, to make sure that all of the stakeholders in the business communities that we have are recognized. And so David is spending an enormous amount of time on that issue, as you can see from his many philanthropic and other activities, but also trying to ensure that Carlyle is part of all of those conversations with governments, with his employee base that he's expanded around the world to include both minorities as well as women in every diverse sense, at the partnership level, and that all of those employees participate in both charitable and voluntary activities as you would hope and want them to do, given their many skills and capacities. Importantly, David has taken on a multiple set, if you will, of philanthropical and additional activities that range in both the healthcare field, the arts, and the education field. As I mentioned, he's a member of the board of Johns Hopkins and Sloan Kettering and Cold Spring Harbor Labs, but also he has given and donated and helped through his efforts construct a healthcare center for low-income families and children at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, David's hometown. In the performing arts field, as many of you here in New York know, David has been extremely active in the reconstruction of Lincoln Center and its redevelopment, and would all encourage you to visit Lincoln Center and certainly drop by the Rubenstein Atrium, which he continues to fund and keep operational. With regard to higher education, we mentioned Duke and Chicago and other schools, but he also is a significant donator to scholarships in those environments, as David was a recipient of scholarships at both Duke and University of Chicago, and particularly values what those opportunities have brought to him. So he and his partners at Carlisle fund a $1 million Twigo Foundation Private Equity MBA Fellowship, a work-study program for Washington, D.C. high school students, and remarkably, a college scholarship program funding 2 D.C. area students for every D.C. high school to go to college. Beyond the health, arts, and education fields, David has also taken on another unique effort. As was reported in the press, David purchased the only copy of the Magna Carta that was in private hands and donated that as a permanent loan to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Not to be topped by that, David also found a rare copy of the Emancipation Proclamation signed by President Lincoln. That document is now situated in the Oval Office for viewing. So David has taken many steps to bring the worlds of the economic life that we all live in and social responsibility, and in fact, with both the Magna Carta and the Emancipation Proclamation, you could say he's taken steps on the cause of freedom, which are the foundations of our capitalist system in many regards. So David has a very full life, travels the world, and enjoys everything he does, as I think you'll hear in a moment. So I wanted to thank you for this moment to bring David to the stage and give this honor.
I want to thank my producers and agents who made this movie possible. Couldn't have done it without them. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'm sorry my mother couldn't be here tonight to hear it. She would have believed it. I realize I am the last person between you and leaving, so I will be very brief. I did start today, as was mentioned by Margaret, in an interview with her, and the day has gotten better since that interview, because we started the interview on Bloomberg, and she said, "Tell me exactly what you meant when you said once that private equity equals sex." And I didn't think on national TV I probably could explain that complicated metaphor, so I thought the day could only get better, and it has by ending this evening. I really want to thank the Foreign Policy Association for doing something I think is very important and maybe rare today, which is recognizing that those in the financial service industry do many things other than just pay taxes and employ people and provide financial services that are useful to corporations around the country and the world. There aren't a lot of dinners honoring people in the financial service industry in Washington today, I assure you. At least I haven't been invited to any of them. But I do think it is important to recognize that people in the financial service industry do more than just pay taxes and employ people and provide financial services that are very important to make the global economy go around. they do many things in the philanthropic area that deserve a lot of attention. And all the organizations that have been talked about tonight have been leaders in this field. And there are other organizations, obviously, that are not represented here tonight, that do enormous amount of good things in philanthropic areas. And I think it's very incumbent upon those of us here and those of us who are listening tonight or who will read about this, to recognize that people in the financial service industry do care very much about this country, and we do very much want to contribute more than just what we might do in our daily lives, but do things outside of our daily lives, do things to help people who are less advantaged, do things to help people who don't have some of the privileges and some of the rights and some of the financial resources that we have. And I do think the financial service industry has been a leader in this field, and we should let people know about it. In my own industry, the private equity industry, we're relatively young compared to commercial banking or investment banking or the kinds of organizations that have been talked about tonight. The industry is relatively modest in terms of its size compared to the others that are represented here, but we have tried of late to let people know that we too care very much about our country and want to do much more in the philanthropic area, and are trying to do so in socially responsible investing, in diversity hiring, environmental protection areas. We're doing much more than we did before, and we're trying to do much more in the future than we're doing today. My own organization has tried to be a leader in many of the things that I just mentioned, socially responsible investing, for example, or investing in companies that are environmentally responsible, or doing things in terms of diversity hiring in our portfolio companies or in our parent organization. We can all do more, and I hope we all will do more, but I hope the lesson that people take out of here tonight is that financial service institutions are not just ones that care about their bottom line, their profit and loss statement. Those are important for sure. We couldn't survive without very successful P&L statements. But the people who make up these institutions are really people who care about this country. Our country was really founded by people who had philanthropic instincts. More than any other country in the world, we give money to philanthropic institutions more in total amount and more per capita than any other country in the world. And that will continue for quite some time, because our country was really founded by people who volunteered. The people who fought in the Revolutionary War were largely volunteers. George Washington was a volunteer. People who were fighting in the militias were volunteers as well. Many of the people who helped build this country did so out of philanthropic instincts. And that tradition has continued for many, many years, and it's one of the greatest strengths in the world that we have. As I travel around the world, the thing that people admire the most about our country are many of our philanthropic institutions and our organizations, our educational institutions, our hospitals, things like that. That's what people really admire, and those things are really built by philanthropic contributions by people in this room and other rooms like this. And so all of you here, I think, deserve credit for being part of this evening, for taking your time and to helping to recognize people, not just me or my institution, but other people who are getting honors tonight. And we really represent not just our own organizations, our 4 organizations, but many other people who are in our industries and many other people in the financial service world who are doing much more than we get credit for. We don't do these things to get credit. We do these things because they're the right things to do. And I think in my own case, I didn't grow up with a great deal of money, and I didn't really have much money as a young man, and I really didn't think about much money. But when I got financially more successful in life, I recognized that you can't be buried with your money. I mean, the ancient Egyptians tried it, and it doesn't really work. So, you know, I think, as Andrew Carnegie once said, what he really wanted to do was to die with no money and to basically give it away before he died. And that's not a thought my children completely agree with, but and as I do try to give away money and be as helpful as I can to institutions, I recognize I'm really giving away my children's money. They've kind of figured it out by now, but I do feel that to whom much is given, much should be given back, and there's much responsibility. So those of us who are financially successful and have other means to help, or time, or energy, or ideas, we really should give back to our society, because that's really what made our country great and so distinctive. And that's really what I think is one of the most rewarding things that I can do today. I do enjoy helping to build a private equity firm and helping to be a leader, I hope, in the industry and within my firm. But I really get much more pleasure today out of helping other people who are less fortunate, who are in the same circumstances I was many, many years ago. And so I think all of you here probably get as much satisfaction out of that as probably I do when you do these types of things. I know it's true, on people's deathbeds, they don't say, geez, I wish I worked a little harder and made a little bit more money. Nobody says that. They always say, I wish I'd spent more time with my family. I wish I'd done a little bit more to help the world become a better place. And all of you should not wait until your deathbeds to do that. And I don't want to wait till my deathbed either. I want to do things that make the world a little bit better while I can still really have some influence on it. So I'm very determined to try to make sure all people in the financial service industry and other people in a position to do so contribute as much of their time and money to making the world a better place in any different way that can be in healthcare, education, helping people with scholarships. Doesn't really make a difference. Do something that makes the world a better place than you found it when you came here, and I think you'll feel much better about yourselves, and I think the world and the country will be much better for it. So thank you all very much for coming, and thank you for this award.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you for making my job easier with quotes like the one you allowed me to quote back to you earlier, with equating leverage and sex. But anyway, you know, as someone who spent a good part of her childhood in Catholic school, those to whom much is given, much is expected, is a quote that's written in basically every wall. So to hear David quote it and to hear basically all of our honorees also recite the same sentiment within the context of their speech as global citizens, it's really a wonderful sentiment to carry through as we talk about corporate social responsibility in the context of financial services right now. And I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you so much for your support for the FPA. And we hope to see you all, if I can speak on part of the organization, we hope to see you all again next year. So enjoy your dessert, and thank you so much.